anything that does involve research into a certain viewpoint, yeah, that's where it gets pretty scary to know how they tweak that.
It's way harder to tell, is this a neutral viewpoint or is it just coming from, very specific data that's been trained with? That's my kind of problem with it.
I guess public understanding of how AI can be manipulated and promoting critical thinking is probably crucial to resisting any sort of subtle propaganda that could be used with these large language models.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Make an Impact. I'm your host, Makoto Kern. I'm here with our wonderful AI team and integrators, Brynley Evans and Joe.
Hey,
how's it going? All
yeah,
right.
it's
We've
going
got some.
pretty good, and looking forward to this episode.
Yeah, we've got a couple exciting topics to discuss today. One is going to be AI models and maintaining neutrality, and the other one is the impact of cheaper AI models. So let's get right to it. Brynley, you want to kick us off?
Sounds good, yeah. So a little bit of kind of going back to what happened earlier this year with the announcement of DeepSeek R1 that happened in January. And obviously it became the most downloaded free application on the US iOS App Store. It even surpassed ChatGPT in terms of download. So amazing, a lot of press around it and hype. And obviously seemed to build an AI model at a fraction of the cost of tech company giants like OpenAI and Anthropic and Google. And
Yeah.
I guess these Chinese models are now being integrated into different platforms as well. I don't know if you heard that Lenovo laptops are now actually having DeepSeek built into them, which is interesting.
Wow.
So,
Yeah.
That's
you
interesting.
sort of start looking at this rollout of all
Mm.
these large language models. And,
Yeah.
while it's an amazing development, it obviously, goes a long way towards democratizing AI models. It could be a risk that many users aren't thinking about, and that's a little bit of really what I wanted to talk around today. So we've all used, most of us, should I say, have used a natural language processor or a large language model, and we can all sort of attest to how useful they are. I know just personally, and between all of us, it helps us work a lot more efficiently. And outside of the general kind of to-do requests that you have or actionable items, I found myself, and a point that we've touched on as well, you find yourself, especially through these conversational interfaces, engaging, with a large language model about politics or history or philosophy. And you can have really engaging conversations, and you can almost have a rapport that, is very close to a natural conversation. So kind of given this friendly voice and believable personality, it's pretty easy to forget what's going on behind the scenes. And leading really us deeper down into how the model is trained could really pose a larger global risk if we aren't careful. And again, don't want to sound conspiracy theorist because I'm far from that, but it's interesting to know, to be cognizant of what could be occurring at the level from the internal rules in these large language models. So
Yeah.
we're obviously on a course to access information faster. We want to be more productive, and these are great tools for this. So everyone climbs in and goes, well, I can be X times more productive. But what I want to say is, are we careful that it doesn't lead to a reduction in critical thinking, which I really believe is an important aspect here. You think you deal with these models, they have answers to any questions. You may be someone that checks the answer the first time, maybe use a different model and check it maybe for the first month, you're fact checking. But a year after that, you probably settle down to a nice comfort zone of, yeah, this is good.
A year is a lot. Like within 10 seconds, I'm like, cool, I trust this thing fully. I'm good to go.
Well,
I'm not fact checking anything here, which is bad. But
that's the thing.
Yeah.
There's you only have to check a few things to think, wow, this has nailed it. This is the knowledge I was looking for. It raised it up.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I would generally like fact check against my own knowledge. I'll ask it something and sort of go, yeah, it's answering as based on what I know of other things, and I can see that it's doing well. But yeah, that's about as far as I go.
Well, that's it. And I think I've also found those sort of initial engagements, you're kind of feeling out, like you're saying, Joe, you're testing your own knowledge and seeing whether it's echoed back, or let's look at a certain political viewpoint or an ethical dilemma, you may be excited to see, oh, no, it's talking to me in a way that, we're on the same page politically or
Yeah.
ethically. So immediately you begin to trust. Now,
Yeah.
if large language AI models are just getting easier, like we're seeing with DeepSeek and what was the one like Manus that you were sharing, that does more for you. There's a certain point that you think, well, what stops these from being weaponized or utilized
Yeah.
by a certain government or another
Mm.
terrorist organization, or to really control their narrative, whether
And it can
it's
even be even subtle, I presume, too, right? It's not like outright
exactly.
you ask a question that gives you like, oh yes, socialist is the best form of government. It's not like being outright obvious about it, but it can be like you're asking something about a certain famous person who's, quite controversial. And just the way it answers, it can guide your opinion on that person. It can be like, yes, this is a misunderstood character. He's done a lot for the world. He's put through all
Quite
of these
right.
initiatives and he has all these charities. And you're like, wow, this is actually like a really good person. Meanwhile, it's just the AI model has got a either programmed or data bound bias to giving that kind of answer and pushing that agenda, and you don't know it. It's like super subtle. It's just giving you information, but it's just omitting maybe everything else. It's not giving you like a fair sort of double
Absolutely.
like you know
Yeah.
comparison of the entire person.
Didn't we do a podcast on AI and transparency? I think back then, but I mean, it's factual where DeepSeek won't say things about Tiananmen Square. There is censorship
Mm,
that we know about. We know that like Google and OpenAI models have been shown to be also politically biased as well. And who knows what kind of corporate
yeah.
pressure that, obviously even Zuckerberg had discussed how he was getting pressure from a social media perspective to suppress certain articles and push others during the
Mm,
Biden administration. So, I mean, I'm curious to see how models can be tweaked. And for the most part, I think most people are using it for very neutral type of tasks, especially if you're using
yeah.
like Manus or something that's more AI, where it's like, hey, go out and do this for me, buy some tickets or do whatever, where
Mm,
it's basically neutral. But, anything that does involve research into a certain viewpoint, yeah, that's where it gets
Mhm.
pretty scary
You think
to know how
journalism
they
as
yeah.
tweak that.
well. If someone's researching something, or if this is the
Mm,
tool for upcoming journalists, where you want to reason with it, or you want to try and just, as you were talking about, Joe, you want to try and understand a viewpoint, but certain things are omitted. And Makoto, what you're saying
yeah.
is, yeah, exactly like
Yeah.
what's alleged with DeepSeek, and anything that's embarrassing to China has sort of been worked around there. And it's those
Mm,
subtleties that I think are dangerous, because
yeah.
it's what I like to call the parable of the boiling frog. Is that slow change is change that you don't notice. You would notice
Yeah.
if there were radical differences in view, but to slowly start
Yeah.
steering people in a certain direction over many
Mm,
years,
it's really easy to do.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
potentially
It
seeing
does.
history in a different light. And
It does make me think, though, just thinking of this purely from a technology standpoint. Like, we have kind of gone through this before. AI isn't really new around this. If you think back to, like, what did we really do before AI? We used Google, right? We searched in Google. Technically,
Hmm.
no difference there, right? Whatever Google results come up with. If
Yep.
you ask about a famous person, the results that'll come up are all positive articles about that person. Very easy to steer narrative there too. So I don't think
Hmm.
from a technological perspective this is something new,
I would
but I think it's
disagree,
just
though.
so much more, well, it's more subtle, right? Because previously you would get a whole bunch of articles and you could look at the site and be like, oh, well, this is a very far right or far left leaning site or something like that. And you can go, okay, well, I can see what the search engine is doing. It's obviously biased towards a certain viewpoint. But when it's coming from the AI, you can't really see the sources it's pulling from. There's no real transparency in how it's even coming up with that answer. So it's way harder to tell, is this a neutral viewpoint or is it just coming from, very specific data that's been trained with? That's my
Why I
kind of
think I
problem
was
with it.
saying I disagreed, and you probably explained a bit there, but it's, at least with something like a search engine, yes, we needed to be trained that, not everything is fact that you're looking at. And maybe that's where, critical thinking became more important. But the difference
Yeah.
is, again, that you're relying on something that aggregates everything. So instead of going, well, out of those sites, sorry, I could see that, these two were left, this was right, this was centered.
Mm.
you can get a balance and make your own decision, opposed to you relying on one source now to say, give me an overview of this, and it's going to give you one opinion. So you no longer have that, oh, okay, maybe that belongs to
Yeah.
that news agency, and it's slightly more covered. And that's probably where it
Exactly.
gets a little bit more dangerous. And
Yeah.
then you've got to
Yeah,
sort of bring up the
definitely.
question of, does the model with the largest user base have the potential to control the narrative of whoever is connected to that model? So you think cheaper models, oh, well, why is everyone going to continue using Claude or ChatGPT when we potentially have a free model over here and it's better than
Yeah.
all of those? Everyone's going to go, well,
Yeah.
great, I don't want to spend $20 a
But
month on.
there is a cost to it. It may not be a financial cost, but potentially an ethical or moral or some other kind of mental cost you're paying for that, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I
So
think.
then,
Oh, I was going to say, there's a new news media that's growing in popularity, and I think it's really smart to what they're doing. It's called Ground.News, and they basically show which article you're reading. It shows the kind of the biasness, if it's more left leaning or right leaning or more center leaning, and the percentage of how much it's leaning, which is really smart. You know, the amount of information we have at our fingertips within seconds is so powerful compared to just 5 years ago, 10 years ago when we were growing up. I had to go to the library or watch, 3 news outlets and that's it, maybe the radio. But now you have so much that it's almost irresponsible that you only do your research on one news media article when you're trying to find something that may have that bias. You should really do a little bit more. It doesn't take much. And I see with I think Grok does it for sure, and I think some of them do cite their sources when you do search for things. So that's great. But doing something with what Ground News does, I think, is really smart to do, especially when you start to get political or anything.
and maybe that's where there actually needs to be some sort of regulatory AI that filters things, where you can say, right, this is the region I'm selecting and the certain guidelines that I'd like it to adhere to, and actually acts as an intermediary between certain models, and potentially even marking them as, right, this could be this is seen
Isn't that
as
just, it's still just moving that responsibility to another AI model.
Yeah.
What if that AI model's compromised? It's
It
kind of
is.
just like moving the goalpost to
But
like
then
another AI
it's
model.
much more difficult for collusion like that, isn't it? So if you had
Yeah.
two independently created models, for there to be, if right, these have completely different origins, it may
You need a governing AI body that watches all the other AIs. That's
the trusted
bipartisan.
AI model.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm keen to kind of think about as well. But I wanted to touch on a few of the things that, because these sort of manipulations of a model and changing or sort of pushing a certain narrative can have such profound political ramifications, and whether this is domestically or internationally. But obviously, it's unlike sort of overt propaganda, it's not seen that clearly, so it's much more sort of insidious in how it would disseminate the information. So we look at a few of the ways this could play out. So we look at subtle mass persuasion and narrative control. So you've got gradual shaping of public opinion. So just by small tweaks, downplaying historical events slightly more and more, or emphasizing sort of particular ideological perspectives, or even just flat out blocking alternative viewpoints. It would be quite easy for an organization or a government to just start slowly steering that public perception over time, and also allow them to.
Sorry, it just reminds me of that quote. Sorry, Brent, just because it popped in my head. Like, that famous quote, "History is written by the victor." And it's kind of like the same thing with like this in a way. It's like, the history of a country is like now being written almost by, the data and AI is trained with, you're just going to rely on that. Yeah, sorry, a bit of a tangent. Just that
It's
quote
absolutely
kind of jumps into my head there in a kind of way. And whichever AI models win the AI war are going to be the victor, right? And we're kind of like then determining our knowledge sources, based on those victors. So, yeah.
And also the fact that
Interesting.
Just inherently people generally, they hear a fact, they don't necessarily fact check it. I mean, the number of facts I can think of that something my parents would have told me that you question 40 years later and you're like, whoa, that wasn't true at all. But I never questioned it. And it's those sort of slowly, almost
Columbus didn't just discover America.
Yeah.
So, those, what are passed as maybe neutral facts would slowly just become ordinary, become common knowledge, but they're based
Mm,
on not on the truth at all, and then slowly shaping global perception from that as well.
Do you see a potential need? I mean, AI agents obviously are the big thing, and having personal AI agents doing things for you. But is this almost like
mm,
how cybersecurity, they have ways to block attacks and things like that? Why can't we create an AI agent that says, well, wait a minute, this article is 35% incorrect or 75% leaning this way or whatever the case is? And
Yeah.
maybe
mm,
just like a quick visual, because obviously no one wants to even do the
yeah.
research, so why not just say, hey, this might be false, or this might be like a Snopes almost, where fact checks
Mm,
everything.
definitely.
Yeah.
That would be very
That's
handy. Yeah.
interesting. And then another one is political polarization and suppression of opposition. So a couple of things like algorithmic amplification of preferred ideologies, which is interesting. So you
Mm,
imagine if the chatbots could slowly start, their algorithm would be like, well, no, let's promote content that aligns with our ruling party's ideology, and then we'll just
yeah.
downrank and not really mention any of the dissenting voices. So that becomes much more prominent, and people buy into that more, or even going to
Mm,
silence critics and political dissidents. So things like,
yeah.
if there are opposing viewpoints, it labels them as misinformation or extremism, and just sort of elevating
Mm.
those state approved narratives.
And I guess the tricky thing with this too is like, a new model comes out, you start using it, everyone, rates it highly, it all looks good, great. But, very subtly over time, it can also change. It doesn't necessarily have to be from the get go something very obvious, but, over the years and years, as years goes by and they update the model, they're just kind of tweaking it over time. And
Mhm.
before you know it, like, it's sort of,
Yeah,
yeah, got an entire agenda to it that, yeah, you just couldn't
exactly.
tell in the beginning. Like that could be happening to ChatGPT right now. Like, how
Yeah,
can anyone really easily tell?
that's it. It's
Mm,
it's fascinating, and the more you think about it, you're
Mm.
like, yeah, I probably need to be a bit more critical and looking at anything that has other than any viewpoints, I guess.
I almost
Yeah,
think that if you're asking like a question which is a very factual, safe question, like how do I change, my car battery, right? That's fine.
Mm,
But I think I almost feel like any other question that gets asked to an AI, like what I think of this political party or this person, I think it should never answer that question itself based on its own data. It should always pull in from the web data sources and then
mhm.
show you a list of all the sources it pulled from, like ChatGPT does right now. If you ask it a question on search, it can show you all the sources. But at least then you're kind of seeing where it's getting its information from. But again, there's a cost and the time cost to that. So obviously that exponentially raises the cost. But that's the only kind of way I can see it being something you can a bit more rely on. Even then, though, the problem with that is it puts the onus on you to like check through all those sources for every single
Mm,
question that you ask. And sure, everyone on this call, may do it. Maybe we're those sort of people, but yeah, probably like 80% of people would never go and check those sources and just go, yeah, sure, I'm sure it's fine. I can
yeah.
see, Microsoft.com there, so it must be fine, right? But meanwhile, it's like cherry picked, four viewpoints on something from, Microsoft News compared to the other 50, which were a different viewpoint, but it just cherry picked them. And you think, oh, it's from, MSN News, it must be fine. But meanwhile, no. But yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, I think price is going to be an important thing to all this. Obviously, it's great to have competition because that drops the price. Supposedly,
yeah.
if DeepSeek really built everything without using the AI chips they don't have, that's something where I think, if with browsers are free, so why not use the free ones? Why pay
Mhm.
$20 or $100 a month for it
Mm,
if somebody's offering it for free? So people are generally just going to jump to that. Just like apps. Apps you used to cost something, now you just download it for free, and then as you use it, then you get charged. So
yeah.
is that the model everybody's probably going to go to? I would assume so.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I think there will be a definite drive to having model on devices, like Bryn mentioned earlier, like just being bundled in with your computer, not like
Hmm.
out in the cloud. There's a few good reasons for that, right? From a security perspective, it's great. Your questions that you're asking aren't going out to some cloud and being trained and used for whatever reason. Way faster, way cheaper. It's not costing you anything. You can throw a million questions out today, and a day, and you're just limited by your own hardware. And it can't be manipulated either, right? It's local on your machine. It can't be like, you go to some site that says, oh, we use the, DeepSeek model in the backend, but you don't really know what model they're using or what they've done to it or what middle layers they have between you and the model. So I think if this becomes a bigger problem over time, I definitely see a shift from people wanting to use local trusted models rather than cloud models, which they just sort of are either too expensive or yeah, it's just way safer and quicker and cheaper to use your
Yeah,
own.
agreed.
One more thing, I was just saying, I'm curious with the whole, obviously, with this kind of being an arms race for sure, we've got a Stargate project, which Trump announced about the 500 billion in AI that they're going to
Yeah.
start building,
Mm,
facilities there. NVIDIA said they're going to invest in the United States as well and build chips here. I'm
mm.
just curious, like that, are other countries going to just start developing their own chips, their own places where they're just building up these areas of just massive AI
Yeah.
data training centers? That's going to be
Mm.
something too.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think the biggest limiting factor right now are the chips themselves, and that's why this DeepSeek model was so, yeah, like industry rocking. Because previously, you'd have to have 500, NVIDIA chips, for instance, like train a model over like 5 days, and this was able to do it on like five chips over a few days, and like so substantially cheaper. But the chips themselves are still, yeah, like the biggest part of this whole equation around which countries can compete, who can build the data centers. Sure, you may get cheaper models that need less chips, but as AI grows, it's just going to grow with it no matter what. This may have opened up the gates to more AI and cheaper AI, but the demand is still going to be there and those chips are still going to be needed. Yeah, that's like a separate podcast in itself. There's only like 2 or 3 companies in the world that produce chips capable of like, really good AI computation. And so
Hmm.
whoever controls those companies kind of will control the data warehouse market and computational market for them, which is why NVIDIA share price skyrocketed. Obviously it's going down now, separate
Yeah.
discussion, but
Then it dropped
it's,
according to the news.
yeah, it dropped. Yeah, exactly. But, that's why, like, because they're one of the only few companies that can actually do it. So I
Hmm.
think from a competition standpoint, from looking at a country perspective, yeah, it's really, if you're a company like Germany and you want to compete, for instance, you're going to have to build your own entire chip making industry. But all that proprietary knowledge and chip making is hard and it's not easy. And
It's like the new
a country would
oil.
have to invest a significant amount of their GDP to compete. Basically, it would have to be like a
Mm.
country's entire focus to actually compete at this point because it's such a hard industry to get into.
Mm.
Hmm.
Mm. So I guess to wrap up, there's so many points we could look into, but how could we prevent this? What are ways that really from a technology standpoint, we could move forward and prevent this sort of thing from happening? And a few of them could be things like open source models or allowing third party audits to verify that they aren't biased. So, some sort of at least AI transparency and open auditing there. Also, just not allowing any single government or company to be able to have absolute control over a widely used NLP. Really trying to
Mm.
decentralize the AI development around that.
Thinking about that, could you imagine a future where a government may say, these are the only approved AI models you're allowed to use in this country, all others are banned? I could see it going down that road, if
Yeah,
this
absolutely.
whole sort of potential worry about bias heats up.
Mm,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, definitely.
interesting sort of thing to happen.
There could be ones. I mean, you see models now. I forget which one being sort of blocked in certain. I'm not sure whether it's China, but certain models
Mm,
being blocked for use there. So yeah,
yeah.
it's definitely a reality that
Mm.
we could be looking at.
And it
Yeah,
would
I think.
be an easy thing for a government to do too, because they could be well, not easy, but like an excuse almost. If a
Mm,
government sort of compromised by private industry and private industry recommends, oh, let's make this big, news stink that this AI model isn't telling the accurate history of our country,
mm,
and it should be banned. But meanwhile, it was banned purely from a competitive point of view. It's a competing model. So, like, for instance, the US
mm,
banning DeepSeek, right? Because they say, oh, we asked it these questions and it had a bias. And so we don't
mm,
want, models that, have a program bias in our to be used by our population. So we're banning it. But meanwhile, it was really just because it was cheaper. And
mm,
Yeah, I think.
yeah,
You
competition.
know what X does as far as like the feedback that readers can give. They can kind of say this is a
Mm,
false narrative or whatever. At least you get some real time, somewhat feedback. Obviously, you could probably game that system a little bit, but at some
yeah.
point you can see like, hey, this is not true, even though this was
Mm,
referenced by this,
mm.
you know, this post.
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
That
Then
stuff is
going back
good.
to what we were touching on earlier is really a sort of global AI ethics agreement. So, what sort of international coalitions could we have that could create rules for, maintaining AI neutrality, similar to even human rights agreements. And then, lastly, just
Yeah,
having,
definitely.
good user awareness and education. So I guess public understanding of how AI can be manipulated and promoting critical thinking is probably crucial to resisting any sort of subtle propaganda that could be used with these large language
Yeah.
models.
I mean,
So, what
permitting
to think
critical
about?
thinking is something that should be happening now anyway, right? Because, even just social media can be so easily influenced with
Mm.
algorithms as it is now, which I feel is
And
a
I think
big
there's a
thing in the
growing
world at the
movement
moment.
for
And
promotion of critical thinking, but I still think it's a long way off
mm,
and should be built into a lot
yeah,
of school syllabuses just
I
to
totally agree.
be able to
Definitely.
function
Mm.
in a world full of different opinions. And
Yeah, if it's up to me, there should be, literally a class in school that every day teaches you how to navigate the internet and information
mm,
and understand it and process it and think about it in a way, not just consume it and take it in and
mm,
actually think about it and have tests where like you sort of test kids against, obvious bullshit kind of
yes,
headlines and
exactly.
see if they can figure it out that it's true or real or fake and how can they do that?
I mean, you could
It's
almost
needed.
like crowdsource that, like audit challenges. You crowdsource it to people who can actually, you make it fun where they could go in,
Mm,
they could check to see how things are actually real or if it's true or
Mm,
whatever. It may be faster because I think one of the challenges you might find is with the regulatory audits, government, as we see, moves very slow. And so are they going to move slower than the actual algorithm updates, which is probably
mm,
true. So there's got to be
yeah.
some ways in which those kind of regular audits up to keep up with tech.
I suppose watch the space. Be
yeah.
interesting to see what happens.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, it's cool.
Joe, do you want to jump to your topics or
Yeah. I don't know if we actually have time to go through it. I guess I could rapid fire it, but
let's try and
like,
we could continue if we need
yeah,
more time.
yeah. I just don't know if listening to Brynley's conversation, that was such an interesting one. I don't know if mine's kind of boring, to be honest, in comparison. Mine's just like a business one. I don't know. It doesn't even feel like I even want to talk about it. It's just like just business stuff. Editor's note, obviously cut all this part of the podcast out.
Otherwise, viewers are going to
um,
be very, or listeners are going to be
yeah,
very
yeah.
confused. What
I
happened?
think I don't know. I think let's leave it there. I'm not feeling like mine's that
I mean,
interesting
we've
in
probably got a
comparison anymore.
good amount with that.
It's a good
Yeah,
We've at
30
least got.
minutes.
Mm.
Yeah.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
think
That's
it
cool.
went nicely with some nice, just flowed. I think
Yeah.
pretty well,
I
like
think we
with
just got to
both
do
your
these more.
engagement.
Yeah. I mean, we
Yeah,
haven't met in a while, so that kind of helped. We haven't talked in a while, but obviously to keep up with everything, it's great to talk more often than once every 3 months. But
yeah,
obviously we had a
Absolutely.
reason.
definitely.
The other thing that I've been doing is launching like 5-minute clips of all our past things just to get the editor
Yeah, cool.
That's
working.
great.
So that actually has been gaining a little bit of traction. I've gotten actually more subscribers doing that.
Oh,
Not a lot. I
interesting.
mean, you're talking, yeah. I mean, not a lot, but it's
Mm,
still like there's an actual quick uptick. It went, 10 subscribers in a week
Hmm.
versus 10 in
mm,
a year. so
Yeah.
yeah,
so
What
there
are you
it
sitting on at the moment?
200. I mean, it's still
It's
low.
pretty good.
Yeah, I think we've hit over 10,000 views, but it's interesting to see. I mean, I tried to tweak a lot of things with just, the algorithms. I'm using different software to try to do SEO type of things, but
yeah. I also think that if you want to drive engagement, I almost feel like the business stuff that we talk about is just going to drive people away. Generally, it's not like mass sort of appeal.
so I think that covers our topics for today. Thanks everybody for joining in. Like and subscribe to our channel and looking forward to our next conversation. Take care, everybody.
Have a good
Yeah,
one.
awesome. Thanks. See ya.
Bye.